Nissan has finally done it. They've brought out their second fully electric vehicle. It's called the Ariya, an all-electric SUV. Now, I had the pleasure of driving it in March 2022, but that was in a controlled environment. So now I can actually put it through its paces on the regular roads. Now, the prices of this vehicle starts from £46,000 and rise all the way up to £59,000. So in this video, we're comparing it to some of its rivals and seeing if it's actually worth its price tag. Now, to kick things off, we have to talk about its electric range. And here, the Ariya is available in different configuration. So it really depends as to which model you end up choosing. You have got a 63 and 87 kilowatt hour battery pack and also a front wheel drive or an all-wheel drive with e-force technology. And we'll touch upon this further down in the review in terms of the handling characteristics that this changes. Now, every single model is fitted with a heat pump as standard, which is certainly appreciated given that some manufacturers, even in this day and age, still do not provide a heat pump as standard. So kudos to Nissan for actually doing that. Now, the model that we actually have on review is the Evolve 87 kilowatt hour front wheel drive model. And this theoretically should get the best range out of the bunch and might be actually the most popular one to pick out of the models that are on offer. Now, the manufacturer claims that you'll get 329 miles on the WLTP cycle. However, from our own mixed driving test, we netted 260 miles, which isn't too shabby. However, it's worth considering that there's some alternatives out there on the market, be it cheaper or indeed more powerful ones that offer better value for money, at least where it comes to range. See here, you have got the likes of the VW ID4 without a heat pump, the Hyundai Kona Electric, the Kia e-Niro, the Kia Niro EV, the Kia Soul EV, and even the likes of, let's say, the MG4 EV long range, all of which hitting roughly 260 miles. Then you have got the likes of the VW ID5, the Skoda Enyaq iV80 and the Tesla Model Y hitting north of 260 miles and actually getting close to the 300 mile figure. So effectively what we're trying to convey over here is that the Nissan Ariya isn't exactly bad in comparison to some of its competitors, but instead doesn't really stand out, which is quite a shame given Nissan's pedigree in the EV space and the success of the Leaf. Now, for you to be as efficient as possible and to recoup energy back into the battery pack, you might want to enable a degree of regenerative braking. Now, here we've got e-pedal mode enabled, which you can see through the instrument cluster, and better still, through the driver assistance settings on the instrument cluster, you can also enable the mode memory, which effectively means that each time you step inside the vehicle, you don't have to reinitiate e-pedal mode, which is certainly appreciated in comparison to some of the alternatives out there on the market. However, what isn't good is the fact that Nissan has removed the ability to drive with a singular pedal. See, right now we're driving at 16 miles an hour, and if I were to lift off from the accelerator pedal, you'll see that I'm still rolling at roughly 6 to 7 miles an hour, which does seem quite baffling because the one pedal driving mode was enabled on the Nissan Leaf. So we're not really sure as to why the manufacturers removed it on the Ariya. Now, you can remove e-pedal mode altogether, and for example, you can coast and drive, or for example, shift down on the gear selector and then go on B mode, therefore having a degree of deceleration. But it still begs the question as to why the option of true one-pedal driving has been removed from the Ariya. Equally, there's no means of actually customizing it through the infotainment system, nor via the use of flappy paddles behind the steering wheel, like you'd find on some alternatives out there on the market. Now, aside from regenerative braking, you have got the ability to plug it in, and here the CCS port is capable of taking up to 130 kilowatts, therefore getting you from 20 to 80% in roughly half an hour. It is a shame, however, that the manufacturer hasn't included a higher current, because here, in comparison to some of its competitors, the Ariya is lagging behind. Now, as for its Type 2 port, it really depends as to which variant you go for. See here, the 87 kilowatt hour battery pack has got a 22 kilowatt onboard charger, while the 63 kilowatt hour battery pack model has got a 7.4 kilowatt onboard charger. Although it's worth noting that for £895 you can actually upgrade it to 22 kilowatts. So therefore it could be handy if you're going to be plugging this in regularly via an AC charging point, be it publicly or for example at a wall box at home or for example at work. Now, in terms of the quotation figures, they differ in terms of the battery pack or indeed the current that you have. But for the 87 kilowatt hour battery pack model that we have on review via 22 kilowatt input, it will take roughly 5 hours to charge from 0 to 100%. This then goes up to 13.5 hours at 7.4 kilowatts, so therefore more of a regular single-phase charger, and then goes up to a whopping 48 hours if you were to plug it in via a domestic 3-pin plug. So moving swiftly on, we get onto performance, and as you might have probably picked out, it really depends as to which model you end up choosing. You've got the front-wheel drive or the all-wheel drive models with e-force technology. This gets you from 160 to 225 kilowatts of power, and from 300 all the way up to 600 Newton meters of torque. Now, just as a reminder, we've got the Evolve 87 kilowatt hour front wheel drive model, and therefore we have 178 kilowatts of power, which equates to 238 horsepower and up to 300 Newton meters of torque. Now, we had it tested from 0 to 60 miles an hour using Race Logic's V-Box Sport in 8.36 seconds. Which isn't too shabby, but doesn't exactly stand out in comparison to some of its competitors. As for its top speed, it's limited to 100 miles an hour, although it does get up to 124 miles an hour in the e-force variants. Now, aside from straight line speed, what about when it comes to handling? Well, here the all-wheel drive e-force models are an absolute marvel. They grip the road extremely well, provide you good sort of driving dynamics, and also incite a good degree of confidence due to having a motor on the front and rear axle. So it's definitely the pick of the bunch for those drivers out there. However, the front-wheel drive variants are not the same. See here, there's quite a lot of torque steer and indeed wheel spin that occurs, and that's due to the power being delivered only to the front axle. Similarly here, the driver's feel isn't quite there. While in terms of its sport mode preset, it does tighten up the steering wheel, it still doesn't give you that one-to-one connection in comparison to some other alternatives out there on the market. Now, the vehicle's biggest issue, however, is its suspension setup. And while this will certainly do well in terms of pottering around town at 20 miles an hour, as its soft setup does seem to soak up a lot of the anomalies and potholes, it does seem to actually go pear-shaped when you're on the motorway. See here, while driving over 40 miles an hour, you might notice a lot of bouncing around and indeed a bit of jittering. So much so that we'll go as far as saying that if anyone suffers from motion sickness while sat inside the Ariya, they might actually have some problems, specifically on longer journeys. Now, this isn't a problem that we've ever noted before on other electric SUVs that we've reviewed, so it's quite surprising to see how the Nissan Ariya was actually configured, specifically given our positive experience of the Nissan Leaf. Now, what also constitutes in having a good driving experience is low cabin noise, and here the Ariya is actually surprisingly well insulated. There's minimal amount of road noise that can be heard creeping in from the tyres, and there's very little amount of wind noise that can be heard deflecting off the A-pillars. In fact, if you want a detailed breakdown of the sound measurements that we recorded, do check out our detailed audio review that can be found up on your pop banner, down in the description below, or indeed in the pinned comments. This does actually perfectly bring us onto its audio system, and here on the Evolve trim that we have on review, it comes fitted with a 10-speaker Bose system. It does well across the frequency range and will certainly suffice for a lot of consumers, although it's worth considering that offerings from Tesla or Volvo completely trump it in almost every single way. Again, more information can be found on our detailed audio review. Now, on the Evolve trims, you will also find a head-up display, which is certainly appreciated, as it allows you to keep your eyes planted on the road rather than having to glance down towards the instrument cluster. So, for example, to check your traversing speed, or for example, the safety systems that are in operation. And you've also got an intelligent rear view mirror, which also serves as a rear view camera when propped up. Indeed, over here, if you've got a tall rear middle occupant, it means that you can still check your surroundings. A very clever inclusion. Now, if you're going for the advanced trim and do like all these features, in other words, the Bose audio system, the head-up display and the intelligent rear view mirror, then you'll have to splash out £1,750 on an additional option. Now, no matter which trim level you go for, the two 12.3-inch displays come fitted as standard. The center-weighted one serves as an infotainment system, whereby you've got touch input, an intuitively laid out menu system, and also a vivid screen. Although it's worth mentioning that there's pretty aggressive coating that's been applied to it, and therefore it does reduce glare, although it does look quite degraded over some alternatives out there on the market. Now, aside from this, for you to connect up to the infotainment system, you have got Bluetooth, or better still, Android Auto and Apple CarPlay are supported over a wired format, whereby there's a Type-C and Type-A port found towards the front of the center console. Apple CarPlay at the time of filming is also supported over a wireless format, and therefore will be certainly appreciated for iOS users. Now, shifting our attention towards the fully digitalized instrument cluster, it is very intuitively laid out and provides all the key driving information that you need. Better still, it feeds through navigation data straight from the built-in system, and this also does appear via your head-up display, which can be quite handy on the Evolve trim. Although it's worth noting that navigation data from Android Auto and Apple CarPlay does not feed through to the instrument cluster nor the head-up display, a feature that we do like seeing on some rival alternatives, and it's a shame not to see it present on the Nissan Ariya. Now, what does stand out over its competitors is the sheer quality and design of its interior. The choice of materials around the dashboard and the door frames and the upholstery and stitching work are all absolutely sublime. It's leagues apart from the Nissan Leaf, which looked a little bit outdated in comparison to its modern rivals. Elsewhere, you've also got the standard inclusion of ambient lighting, which therefore adds a touch of class, specifically in low light conditions. Now, aside from this, you have got a movable center console, and this is present only on the Evolve trim. Now, we're not really sure where you'll actually use this, but it's still nice to have that customizable feel within the cabin, therefore allowing you to place goods at the front or at the rear of the cabin, depending on your configuration that you've chosen. Now, what isn't as intuitive to use, however, is the inclusion of haptic buttons towards the center console and the dashboard, and indeed the latter is used to adjust your climate. We would have preferred if Nissan had just stuck to traditional controls, like it has done with the steering wheel, whereby you'll find physical buttons, which makes it easy to adjust, for example, your media or, for example, your cruise control settings. We do appreciate this is somewhat of a nonsensical recent trend from manufacturers, but it's unfortunate to see it present on the Nissan Ariya. Now, on the subject of those haptic controls, on our Evolve trim, you might have noticed an open and close function, and indeed this reveals a powered storage carrier, which can be accessed towards the front of the cabin. This can be pretty handy if you want to store away some more sensitive goods and do not want them to be accessed even if your car were to be broken into. Hopefully that will never happen, but nonetheless, it's a useful inclusion from the manufacturer. Now, this does actually bring us on to storage, and at the front you have got a glove compartment present on, of course, all trim levels, and it will certainly suffice in terms of the overall storage capabilities that it offers. Then you've got the door bins, which are pretty large, although it's a shame not to see them lined in fabric, and therefore loose change or, for example, your keys will be rattling around if you're traversing uneven terrain. But thankfully there's a small little cubby hole that can be found underneath the armrest compartment, and this also sits alongside a wireless charger, which comes present on all trim levels. Now, as for the rear of the cabin, the door bins are unsurprisingly a little bit more limited and unfortunately are still not lined in any sort of fabric material. And if you're not transporting a fifth occupant, you can reveal an armrest whereby you'll also find 2 cup holders. Now, of course, when it comes to storage, we have to talk about its boot capacity. And here, to access it, there's a button found within the cabin, on the remote, and also just above the number plate. Now, you will hear there's a little beeping sound, and unfortunately that is present each time you open or close the tailgate. But on the flip side, it is electrically operated, and that comes fitted as standard on all trim levels, and that's certainly appreciated. Better still, it's got that hatchback design, and as someone who's just under 6 foot, I've got no problems when it comes to accessing the rear of the vehicle. Better still, you've also got 466 litres to play around with, which we think will suffice for a lot of consumers. This does drop down to 480 litres on the all-wheel drive e-Force model due to the placement of the secondary motor. Now, when it comes to the overall accessibility, it's great to see that you have got a flat loading bay with 60/40 rear split folding seats, and unfortunately we don't have a total figure in terms of the amount of capacity you get when you drop down the seats, but we can only imagine it sits around 1,200 to 1,500 litres. Now, elsewhere you have also got a very large underfloor compartment storage, which can be handy for taking your charging cables or even the boot load cover, which is something of a rarity nowadays in modern vehicles because it doesn't seem to be designed in mind. Then you've also got some side bays as well, which can be handy for, let's say, taking a water bottle or even, let's say, a bottle of champagne to your friends or family. Now, it is worth considering that the Ariya does not have a front storage space, and this is somewhat of a missing feature over the alternatives out there on the market. But given that its competitors do not offer an easy means of accessing the front of the vehicle, it's not something that we overly care about. But we're curious to know what you make of it down in the comment section below, as to if it's a feature that you'd be looking out for on an all-electric vehicle, or it's something that you do not overly care about. Now, aside from transporting goods, what about when it comes to giving someone a lift? Well, at the rear of the cabin, as someone who's just under 6 foot, I've got no inherent complaints when it comes to legroom, although headroom could have been a little bit better optimized. Here, the likes of, for example, the Skoda Enyaq iV or the Volkswagen ID4 provide far superior headroom. Now, this will be a cause for concern, specifically if you're sat at the middle, whereby headroom is even more limited. But thankfully, unlike some of its competitors, the Nissan Ariya has got a completely flat rear footwell design, and therefore means that the rear outer occupant or even the rear middle occupant can really stretch out their legs, and that's certainly appreciated. Now the same could be said about the front of the cabin, whereby Nissan has really optimized their vehicle. Speaking of which, at the front of the cabin you've got these zero gravity seats, which aside from the marketing are actually very comfortable when it comes to longer commutes. Better still, the front seats are fully electronically adjustable and heated, while the driver's seat has also got lumbar support. The steering wheel is also heated. Now this is all as standard on the advanced trim levels, but if you go for the Evolve trim, you'll also find ventilated front seats and heated rear outer seats, which are certainly appreciated. On top of that, you also have got a panoramic glass roof, which brings in a lot of extra light within the cabin. Of course, if you do not want that extra light, there's an electronically adjustable sunshade. Now, our only complaint, however, is that the one-touch operation automatic rear windows do not fully drop down. And indeed over here means that your rear occupant can't fully enjoy the scene that you're driving in. A very small complaint, but something we thought to highlight in our review. Now, on the subject of its rear window, it does actually perfectly bring us onto its exterior design. And while looks are very subjective, we'll go as far as saying that it's one of the most stylish all-electric SUVs on the market. See here, we feel it has some inspiration from other manufacturers. From the front, you've got that bubble-shaped design, which is similar to a Range Rover Evoque or, for example, a Mercedes EQA, all while retaining Nissan's DNA thanks to its headlight design. Towards the side, you've got 19 or 20-inch wheels with these alloy covers. No complaints over here, although it would have been great to see body-coloured wheel arches and side skirts. Thankfully, if you go for a toned-down colour finish, it can actually help it blend. So for example, to the ceramic grade that we have on review. Now as for the rear, it's got that sporty and also modern flair to it, which is somewhat reminiscent of the Audi e-tron or the Audi Q4 e-tron. Here it's got an integrated spoiler, a taillight design that stretches the entire width of the vehicle, and a robust looking bumper, which adds to the overall pizzazz of it. Now we'd be curious to know what you make of the Nissan Ariya's design down in the comment section below. So moving swiftly on, we get onto safety, and here the Ariya scored 5 out of 5 stars on Euro NCAP's rigorous crash tests, scoring particularly well in terms of adult and child occupancies and also the safety assist score. Indeed, here there is a plethora of driver assistance systems that are built in as standard across all trims, which is certainly refreshing. Here you've got the likes of emergency brake assist, traffic jam assist, traffic sign recognition, lane centering, and also lane departure warning, which by the way doesn't actually work that well, but nonetheless you've still got rear cross traffic alert, blind spot monitoring, and even intelligent cruise control with stop and go technology, which actually works a treat in terms of regulating the distance between you and the leading vehicle. All of these technologies are certainly appreciated, and given the price point of the vehicle and some of its competitors, Nissan should be really commended. Now when it comes to visibility and parking, here the front and side are actually pretty good, although you've got pretty chunky A-pillars, somewhat similar to the Tesla Model Y or for example the Tesla Model 3, meaning that you kind of have to peer around the side. As for the rear, it is a little bit limited, but thanks to the inclusion of standard 360-degree cameras and front and rear parking sensors, and on the Evolve trim you've got that rear view mirror with that camera function built in, it means you're going to have absolutely no problems when it comes to reversing into a tight parking space. Furthermore, you've got a tight turning circle of just 10.8 meters, which means that maneuvering the Ariya is actually a breeze. So with all that in mind, it brings us on to our verdict of the Nissan Ariya. And quite frankly, it's not a bad electric vehicle. Its range is decent, it's got a very supremely stylish interior and exterior design, its boot capacity will suffice for a lot of individuals, the rear occupancy space is pretty good as well, and there's plenty of tech to very much bolster the overall driving experience. But unfortunately, its range doesn't stand out, and nor does the overall driving experience. Then you consider the price point it comes in at, then you're going to be left wondering why you're going to be spending out this much amount of money on this Nissan when there are alternatives out there, such as the likes of Citroën, MG, Skoda, Volkswagen, Volvo, Tesla, and even Audi, all of which offer compelling options in this segment, and they're ones that we would actively recommend. So do check out our detailed reviews down in the description below. Now we'd be curious to know if you've ordered this vehicle and or what you make of the Ariya in comparison to some of the alternatives that have been mentioned. Now if you've liked this independent detailed review, definitely do consider dropping a like, subscribing and hitting that bell notification, all of which are greatly appreciated. As such, I've been Chris from TotallyEV, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves, and goodbye.